Today we're going to talk about the 15th of the month above, the uniqueness of the day, the various occurrences that led it to being a joyous holiday, and what we can learn from it. So the Gemara tells us at the end of Maseches Tainus that there were no joyous holidays for the Jewish people like these 2 days of Tu B'Av and Yom Kippur. And the Gemara says various reasons that led to it being such a joyous day. The Gemara says first, there was a time when the Jewish people, after they entered the land of Israel, they were not allowed to marry from one tribe to another in order to ensure that their ancestral plots that they received in the land of Israel wouldn't go from one tribe to another. And eventually that was taken away, this decree of not marrying one to the other, on Tu B'Av. And so too, there's another reason that's brought down, that there was a time where the tribe of Binyamin, they had a terrible incident with the story of Pilegish Begiva, and the sages said that the other tribes are not allowed to marry into the tribe of Binyamin, and eventually on Tu B'Av this was taken away, where they were allowed to come back into marrying the other tribes. The Gemara says another reason where Shekalu by Mesa Midbar, there was the people of the generation that experienced the revelation of Hashem by Har Sinai, and then they had the story of sending the spies and they weren't able to enter the land of Israel. So all those people who were not allowed to come to the land of Israel, they passed away in the desert, and that culminated on Tu B'Av, where no more people passed away. Another reason the Gemara says is because there was a city that was destroyed, Beitar, and there were many people that were killed in it, many sages, and they weren't allowed to enter to bury those sages, and the place stunk, and there was a very horrible scene, and eventually on Tu B'Av, the sages were allowed to enter and to bury all of those people that were killed in the city of Beitar. And lastly, the Gemara says, Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, they say that it was the day, Tu B'Av was the day that they stopped cutting the wood for the Mizbeach. And Rabbi Elazar Agadol says that the sun is not as strong after Tu B'Av, and therefore the wood would not be dry enough in order to do its proper work, and therefore they would have to finish before. And Rabbi Menashia says that this day of finish cutting the wood for the Mizbeach was actually called Taber Mago, the day of the breaking of the axe. So let's focus on the last reason for why that would be a cause of celebration. So for the first reasons, we can understand why they were special, as they all led to joyous outcomes. But when it comes to the cutting of the wood, finishing up, well, what led to such a celebration, that you have various opinions all agreeing on that's the reason for the celebration of the day, and that would cause it that we shouldn't have any other holidays that would equal in joy to the day of Tu B'Av. So Rabbeinu Gershom, he explains that the reason why it was such a celebration when they finished cutting the wood is because after they finished cutting the wood, they weren't occupied anymore with doing all the necessary tasks that are associated with cutting the wood, and they would be able to be more occupied in the study of Torah. But the Rashbam says that seemingly that's not the reason, as that's not what the Gemara is emphasizing on, and we find various mitzvahs that we don't make such a big celebration for the completion of them, and you have the ability to learn more Torah. So the Rashbam says that actually the reason is because it was a mitzvah gedolah, the day that they finished cutting for the wood of the Mizbeach. So let's understand why. And also, Rabbi Menashia, he said that the day was the day that was called the cutting of the axe. And there's various commentaries who learn it in multiple ways. The Rashi and the Rashbam learn it that it wasn't just that they stopped cutting the wood, but they actually would go and they would break the axe. So the question that's brought down is, why would they actually break the axe? Seemingly, you don't have a use for it this year, you'll have use for it for another year. And also, it might be Bal Tashchis, you're destroying something that has a purpose. So we could explain like this: the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And the reason why it was destroyed was because there was sinas chinam, there was free hatred between the Jewish people without cause, without reason, and that led to the ultimate destruction of the temple. Now, each one of the first reasons, they all led to a good thing, and you can say that they, in some way, they rectified what took place on Tisha B'Av, on the saddest day of the Jewish calendar, and that is where you have the Shvatim coming and marrying each other. That's bringing unity, that's allowing them to marry into each other, and also giving every individual person a complete portion of his land that's not inalienable, but he's able to transfer it to others, and that would bring out a much deeper level of them inheriting the land, because we know there's inheritance and there's a present. If the Jewish people just inherited the land and they weren't able to give it to others, they were limited, And also when it comes to a present, if they don't have access or the ability to receive or give any other portion of the land of Israel, they were lacking in that. So the tribes being able to marry into each other was rectifying in the sense of the Tisha B'Av, where you had the destruction of the temple. Over here you had a advancement where you are getting closer to inheriting the land and having more unity among the Jewish people. And the same thing with the Haruge Beita, the people who were not able to be buried and they were staying in the city. Once you're able to bring them to their proper burial and to enter the city, you're culminating and finishing that chapter of an element and a part of the destruction. And the same thing with the people passing away every year in the desert. By them stopping to, that's obviously a positive advancement, and that's bringing out the idea of inheriting the land and going along the natural and proper order of the world of Hashem wanting the Jewish people to go into the land of Israel. So now when it comes to the last reason of them stopping to cutting the wood, seemingly what's the big joy? It was only a preparation for another preparation. They cut the wood, then they would have to actually go to the Mizbeach later on and then put it on the Mizbeach, and then later you could bring a sacrifice. So we can say that this is actually the real remedy for the destruction of the temple. And the reason being is when Jewish people would come many months in advance, and they would go and give of their time and give of their money to contribute and donate to the temple these pieces of wood in order to ensure that many months later, when a Jew comes, or when a congregation comes, or multiple people come to bring sacrifices in the temple, they should have everything that they need and have everything prepared, that they should do the mitzvah properly. That's a huge mitzvah, and that's why it's a simcha gedela, because it's also known as tzedakah. But more than that, it's not only tzedakah, but it's a high level of tzedakah. And the reason why it's a high level of tzedakah is because not only you're helping an individual, you're helping multiple people, and it's on a very high level, as the people who are receiving, they don't necessarily know who the people who contributed this wood, who they are, and the people don't know exactly who they're benefiting. So it's a high level of tzedakah. But furthermore, it actually brings out the deeper level of the temple, and it makes the temple complete. As we know, there's two reasons for why Hashem made the Beis HaMikdash. Number one is that His divine presence should be rested in this holy home, and the second thing is the place that where you can bring korbanos, sacrifices. So through them preparing many months in advance and contributing to the temple, the wood for the Mizbeach, they brought out the completion of the temple, and therefore it was a complete joy. And therefore we can understand why Reb Menashe says it was a day of breaking of the axe. Seemingly, why did they break the axe? They could have a future purpose. But what Reb Menashe is teaching us is that breaking of the axe signifies something much deeper. We know that in the temple they weren't allowed to bring iron, because it says iron was used for weaponry, and it's something that would decrease a person's days, and therefore it wasn't allowed to go on the Mizbeach, which the Mizbeach signifies increasing someone's life. In order, through bringing korbanos, would bring a lot of blessing, would make a person have a long life, etc. And therefore you weren't allowed to have iron in the temple. So what Menashe is saying is, when the Jewish people did this cutting of the wood many months in advance, and they would have everything prepared in order to help their brothers later on when they would need it in the temple, the sages would break the axe to signify this idea that there's going to be a time that there's not going to be any more axes or any more iron that's being used for a negative purpose, but only for good. And this leads us to what the Gemara says later, that on Tu B'Av it says the girls would go out and they would dance, and there was an extreme joy. And it says the same thing about Mashiach, that Hashem is going to dance with all of the Jewish people, all of the tzaddikim, all of the Yidden in a circle, and we're going to have extreme joy, and it's ultimately going to lead to the blessing of Bechar B'Chiteisim Itim. It says that all the various swords and all of the various materials that are used for negativity will be transformed into positive. And this is something that we taste every year, and we have a glimpse into on Tu B'Av, and may we have it speedily, the coming of Mashiach, where we'll see it all in a revealed way.